tarde a todos, muito obrigada pela presença. O Piano e Suas Perspectivas é um programa da Escola de Música e Artes Cênicas, Reitoria Digital da Universidade Federal de Goiás, Mississippi State Universrity e Universidade do Atlântico, com apoio da Fundação para Ciência e Tecnologia de Portugal, Centro de Estudos de Sociologia e Estética Musical da Universidade Nova de Lisboa, Centro de Estudos Brasileiros, Rádio Universitária e Rádio Brasil Central FM. Fazem parte desse programa, além de mim, Rosângela Skrowaczewski, Pablo Lisboa, Wesley de Menezes e Amira Rodrigues Nunes. Nossa proposta é levar a todos os interessados assuntos relacionados à importância da arte e seu papel na sociedade. Muito obrigada pela presença. The Piano and its Perspectives is a program of the School of Music and Performing Arts, Digital Department of the Federal University of Goiás, Universidade do Atlântico in Colombia, and the Mississippi State University, United States, with support from the Foundation for Science and Technology of Portugal, Center for Studies in Sociology and Musical Aesthetics of the University of Lisbon, Center for Brazilian Studies, Radio Universitária and Radio Brasil Central FM. Besides me, Pablo Lisboa, Rosângela Skrowaczewski, Amira Rodrigues Nunes, and Wesley de Menezes are part of the program's team. Our proposal is to bring to all those interested issues related to the importance of music and its role in society. The interview today will be Dr. Rosângela Skrowaczewski, Head of the Piano Department, Mississippi State University. Welcome, Dr. Skrowaczewski.
No, thank you very much. Welcome, everybody that is watching us. I would like to welcome Dr. Korevaar from University of Colorado. Welcome, Dr. Korevaar. Thank you so much for accepting the invitation.
I'm very happy to be here and to have a chance to chat with you today.
It seems that I know of you through other colleagues, and I know you've been in Brazil, as well as my town, Goiânia, where Andrea is from, and where the University Federal of Goiás is. So thank you very much, and we appreciate you accepting this interview. And we're going to talk about the piano, but not only performances, but all the perspectives that right now pianists have to include in their professional life. So I would also like to welcome any questions that anybody that is watching us right now would like to ask Dr. Korevaar. I'll be the moderator specifically. So I would like for you to start just talking about yourself, how you started learning music, how you started learning piano, because from there we can ask other specific questions.
Okay. Well, the beginning of my story, I think, is maybe not so unusual. When I grew up in a family where everybody took music lessons because their mother said they should. And I was the youngest child, and I really wanted to do it because I wanted to compete with my brothers, I guess. So I started taking lessons when I was 6 years old. And we had a wonderful teacher. This was in San Diego, California, a man named Sherman Storr, who is completely forgotten now, but actually, during his life, he wrote a number of pedagogical pieces and whatnot, which very few of them were published in sort of visible venues, but we got to play some of them. And so I grew up with that model of somebody who was a composer, who was a pianist. He was also really interested in American ragtime. And it was a period in the 1970s when there was a lot of interest nationally. So I remember him, he wrote his own rags, and he also played rags by other composers, including a lot that were not Scott Joplin, which was interesting at that moment. In any case, I had all of that exposure. Then when I was 12 years old, he had me go and play for the great American virtuoso Earl Wild, who was living in Palm Springs, California, which was about a 2.5-hour drive from San Diego. And Earl took me on as his student there. He was doing very little. He was actually kind of in a period of semi-retirement because he'd had some health issues, and he was actually taking a little break from the concerts and all that he had been doing. So I was really lucky because I got so much of his attention during this period. And it was interesting because he was not really experienced in, I think, teaching a student like me with maybe not the strongest of technical backgrounds and whatnot. But somehow over a period of about 8 years, I figured out what he was teaching me. And there's so many lessons from that I still use today. And I remember when I'm teaching now, there's so many things that he said that I remember. It's kind of fascinating to see how these things come back. So that was my beginning.
So can you tell me more about Earl Wild? He is one of the most famous virtuosic pianists that we have in history. And he sometimes obscured by the Russians that came to the United States and had a career. Talk more about him and his technique and what you said. You still remember what he told you?
Yeah. So, he was certainly unusual in his time for not having ever really had a Russian school teacher, I think. And in the middle of his life, he was very much influenced by working somewhat with Egon Petri, and then also with a student of Petri's named Paul Zukofsky, who was actually Earl's contemporary, but Petri actually suggested that Earl play for Paul. I later worked with Paul Zukofsky as well, so there was this very strong connection to this way of playing that I think owed a lot to Petri and therefore to Busoni. But a very different approach from most other American pianists of his time. And I think you hear that if you listen to the recordings. If you think about his contemporaries being people like Gary Grafman or, so these other American pianists who were very, very much influenced by a kind of Russian school of teaching in that period. What if I had to distill it, and this is very, for the pianists out there, the most important lessons were ones I think that any teacher would give, which is you stay very close to the keys all the time.
Yep.
You keep your hand rather quiet. You keep your arms and shoulders quiet. And, I've learned a lot more about what that means now, sort of from a more an anatomical point of view. His point of view on it was much more intuitive in a way. It's just, it's what he learned to do. But it was a very unfussy technique, and that was his great success. And if you listen to his recordings, what you can hear is just the amazing sort of clarity and lightness that he could get without any real effort. There was effort, obviously. He practiced a lot, but it was the appearance of effortlessness, and also a very wide range of sound and dynamics without the kind of demonstrative physicality that we've grown used to seeing. It's something I aspire to, but don't always succeed at.
Yeah. He also studied with Marguerite Long, right? And
that was Paul Zukofsky, yeah. So Zukofsky is another character in this story. We can talk about him. I can say more about him in a way because much less is known, because he didn't have a public career as Earl did. Earl always, his sort of touchstones were the performances of Rachmaninoff he'd heard when he was young. And he was very taken with that. And Rachmaninoff was, of course, a very economical player as well, and very undemonstrative in his playing, much less outwardly emotional, much less hot than a lot of people play Rachmaninoff's music today. So I think that's another interesting perspective that I was brought up with, was a certain coolness in approaching some of this repertoire, which I think suits it very well and suits that style very well. It's just as romantic, but it's without maybe the exaggeration that I think has become much more common today.
Well, there are a few of his recordings, and that is very clear in some of his recordings, the subdued romanticism that is so much misinterpreted nowadays. What I really liked of what you said is the economical way of performing music, which is now kind of, we are in a different path.
Well, I think so. I think there's, like you could, if you're talking about things that happen in the latter part of the 20th century, everybody's on a different path, right? There's so many different paths. And I have to say that as I have, I have watched the sort of field of teaching piano mature in good ways. I feel like actually that a lot of the kinds of messages around, for example, good good use of your body, the sort of Alexander technique approach and this kind of thing, that's had a very, very broad impact at this point, I think, on the way piano is being taught at least in the US.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm seeing less. I remember when I was first doing master classes and whatnot back in the 1980s and 90s, and seeing the way people were being taught then versus now, I feel like it's gotten much better in a lot of ways. I see, at certain levels. So, yeah.
You also mentioned that while you were at Juilliard, you studied with Abby Simon. What can you say about his teaching? Because he's also a fabulous pianist. So.
Yeah. So Abby, I came to Abby rather late because I had done my undergraduate and my master's with Earl, and I finished my master's degree in 1983. And then I did not continue in school at that time. I went back for my DMA in 1998, so 15 years later, and then I worked with Abby Simon, but I'd already, I'd been playing the piano. I was actually starting to record at that point. I had played many concerts and been teaching in not great places up to that point, but I went back for the doctorate in part to get that credential that allowed me to get into these interviews that you have to get into to get a better job. But what I really discovered when I went back for my doctorate, there are two things. Working with Abby was wonderful. I would say, to be very honest, when we started out, it was a little awkward because he wanted to make sure I understood that he was the teacher and I was the student. And I wasn't necessarily ready to hear that. And I think we figured it out, and I ended up learning some wonderful things from Abby. But less, by that time I was very much formed. I was older. I was well into my 30s. So he didn't make any large changes in my technique, but he also he opened up some things for me. What I'll never forget is one of the last times I saw Abby, I was playing a recital down at the University of Houston, and I remember I played the Schubert A major D959, and after the concert, Abby came up to me and he said, "Good, David, you finally sound like a human being." I love that, but I remember it because it's so telling about the way we grow, right? And about how hard it is actually to play like a human being because we work so hard to do things correctly. That was one of the nicest compliments I've ever gotten.
Yeah. Well, and I do believe too. I am not comparing myself to you, but whenever I had to play for some wonderful musicians, and if I got a tap in my shoulder and say "good," that meant it was good.
No, that's right. We've changed a lot, right? And for me, I know my teachers were always very sparing of compliment.
Mm-hmm. And I think I personally appreciate that type of teaching, because when they say something, they mean it.
Right.
And that's one thing that he probably was cheering and really impressed with your playing. Well, you mentioned already that you got your DMA so you could choose and go to a more prestigious university to teach. But prior to that, you were also teaching. So what brought you to the teaching field, since you already were recording and you were with a career in performance?
Yeah, I mean, my career in performance was never quite good enough, to pay all the bills. That's one thing. There's practicality there. And I, on another note, I think I've always wanted to teach. I started rather late. I look at students now and I see so many, students in our program and whatnot who start teaching in their undergraduate years. And I never actually did that. I didn't begin teaching until I'd finished my master's and had moved on to, to other things in my life. And I began teaching regularly in a community music school where I was teaching middle school and high school students of varying talents, a couple of very good ones, and then a lot of just students who loved to play the piano but weren't going to do anything with it. in their, in terms of a performance career. And I got a lot of pleasure from that. It was not a great place to be teaching that population because it was too close to New York City, which meant that all the best students would go in and study in the Juilliard Prep Division or the Manhattan Prep Division, and we couldn't get those best students really where we were. And then eventually I was teaching also at a smallish university, the University of Bridgeport. It had shrunk considerably, where I had some very nice students. It was kind of a strange situation. The university, I think, is still owned by the Unification Church, which is as the Moonies. And they were using it in part as a recruiting mechanism for people from abroad who wanted to study in the US. So, but I actually met some absolutely wonderful students through that while I was teaching there. And then in 2000, I came as an assistant professor to the University of Colorado Boulder, and I haven't looked back. That's been a wonderful home for me for the last 22 years.
Yeah, we are working with Hagee and Cooperstock, right? Am I correct?
Yes.
We had both of them here at Mississippi State as guest artists in different situations, but also good colleagues and wonderful performers.
Yeah. I mean, I'm very lucky to be teaching alongside wonderful people. I mean, the whole College of Music is like that. It's an amazing institution.
Wonderful. Let me ask you this. One of the things nowadays that pianists and professors do, which is something that we don't learn in school, is other things that come with a job that it's not in the job description. And we ended up doing a lot of things that we see the need of it, and we ended up doing it. And that's what the program is about, is the perspective of being a pianist and the things that we do besides teaching and besides performing. So can you tell us what you've been doing at University of Colorado?
Well, so I mean, if you're talking about the last couple of years, what have we all been doing, right? This has been, I think it's been unprecedented times. But I guess the thing that we don't learn in school about taking on a tenure track position at a university is, how academia works, right? It's not like we are going there and we're going to be sort of playing all these concerts and then teaching a few wonderful students who just sort of appear miraculously, and in our studios, and we're going to be, there's this kind of idea that takes care of itself. And of course, we spend a lot of time on recruiting our students, and we spend a lot of time on making sure that the university continues to run. One of the wonderful things about a big public school like mine, and you may well have the same kind of situation, is how strong the faculty governance is. But faculty governance requires faculty participation. And so, we have a good situation because we work as a faculty to have a good situation, and we have to work together for that to be the case. I know that's not true at all institutions. It's certainly true at mine, though. And so but that requires energy and time. I think, we laugh that we have 3 jobs in a tenure track job like mine, because we are supposed to be teaching, and that's supposed to represent 40% of our work time, right? I love these percentages. And then we're spent 40% of our work time on our creative work / research, whatever that constitutes, whether that's writing papers, giving presentations, making recordings, playing concerts, some mix of those things. And then we still have 20% of our time left for service, which includes this faculty governance piece, which can require substantial amounts of time. I mean, I'm just coming off a 3-year term as department chair for keyboard. And, this is an uncompensated position in our school, and it's a lot of work. It's an interesting thing, and we do it cheerfully enough most of the time, a little grumbling here and there, but it's all there because that's what's going to make the students continue to succeed, because we have to have this environment where our students can do the things they have to do. And then, of course, we also have to advise our students in terms of their academic programs, in terms of what music they're going to learn, and then also in terms of how they're going to go forward in their lives. And I have to say that when I did my DMA at Juilliard, nobody talked about any of that.
Yeah. Well, here I have 62%, almost 63% of teaching. The remaining is research. And service used to be 25%, but now it's not even a percentage, but it's counted and expected. I'm on my going towards my 12th year as the chair, and I had to raise money to buy new pianos. And I'm also part of University College and Departmental Committee. It's a lot.
Yeah, you're a smaller department, of course, because
Yeah.
we're very lucky to be in a college of music, and that what it means is that we actually at this point have a very strong fundraising team.
Yeah.
And that's what their job is. And of course, we follow up on leads, but most of the hard work is being done by the advancement team.
Good.
The faculty, so the faculty are not responsible for that.
Yeah.
Which that's a godsend for us, as you can imagine.
Yeah. We have to work with the foundation though, but I understand. And this is something that I don't think in other countries, and I can say this because I'm from another country, that we don't have that so much in other countries, but is expected in the United States. Another thing that I would like to talk about are your projects. And you mentioned the writing as well as performing, but I see that you have wonderful projects, and one of them is the underrepresented composers, Cecile Chaminade, Leslie Adams, and also Florence Price. I see that you have some recordings of those, and I will ask if it's okay with Andrea. She's in the backstage helping us to click on the Florence Price. We will start with the Florence Price sonata in E minor. And that's a YouTube link that you had provided us. So let's wait and see if Andrea can click on the YouTube link and provide us with that. Before that, as she's trying to get the YouTube link included, there you go.
There it is.
to stop a little bit so we can continue talking. But this is wonderful. I've known some of her works, but not the sonata. In fact, as we talked a little bit before, some of her individual works, smaller size works, and the concerto, which is really in one movement, but 3 sections. So anyway, what can you tell me about her music?
Well, so she's been getting a lot of attention lately. Florence Price was born in Little Rock, Arkansas. She went to the New England Conservatory to study organ, actually, as an organ major, but then worked on composition there, and that made a great impact. Then she went back to the South and was teaching in small Black colleges, first in Little Rock and then in Atlanta, I think, because of the pressures of Jim Crow. This would have been by the 1920s or so. The life for her in the South had essentially become impossible. Mm-hmm. So she moved to Chicago, sort of start over again. And in Chicago, she really established herself as a composer relatively quickly. And remarkably, her first symphony was performed by the Chicago Symphony. And she wrote this sonata and the first symphony, if I'm remembering, both won this prize that was offered by this department store family in Philadelphia. But that gave her sort of a good start in the 1930s. What I love about this music, and I think the reason that it's appealing to people so much, is how her voice combines these different perspectives that she grew up with. And she was very much influenced by Dvorak, who, of course, did use African-American melodies in his music, in the pieces he wrote while he was in the US. But she was actually also much influenced by her teacher in New England, who had also been exploring that area before Dvorak did. And she also brings to bear a kind of, there's a kind of theatricality and I think a lot of joy in her music always that I just find so appealing. And she writes beautifully for the piano. She also does fun things, like there's a what I'm fairly sure is a quotation from Chopin's first ballade hidden in that first movement. It's in the recapitulation. We didn't quite get to it.
Yeah.
But there's so much there. And every piece of hers I hear or play, I just fall in love with. I did the piano quintet this year as well. It's a wonderful piece. There's a real problem right now. A lot of things are being put out in some good editions. The piano sonata was issued in the 1990s by Schirmer, and the edition is terrible. Mm-hmm. And so actually one of my projects, I had to make a lot of guesses, but actually I have at this point, I have access to a copy of the manuscript, and I need to go through it because I think there's a lot of things that need to be fixed in the published score.
I think what they have now is she has her own website that sells her music, and it's, at least that's what I know, it's true to her manuscripts. That's what I heard. Also, I don't know if you know, but at the time she enlisted herself as a Latin woman in the conservatory because at the time they wouldn't accept African American students.
Right. That was her mother made her do that. That's an interesting thing too. Yeah. And there was a lot of tension. She was quite light-skinned, and I think she was very conscious of being a Black woman, and I think that was something that disturbed her. The need to do that, obviously.
She also is the founder of the African American Association of Composers, and she's called the Dean of African American Music. And she worked very hard. I think the premiere of her concerto was done by Margaret Bonds, and she was conducting the orchestra at the time. So she has been. And I've known her just for the past 2 years. It's been a good discovery, and I'm glad that you recorded that. Yeah. And that becomes a reference to a lot of people that are interested in the underrepresented composers. So You also have the Chaminade Sonata in C minor, and I would like to show that as well, because Chaminade is another composer that is coming up in the past 5 to 10 years. So let's hear the Chaminade Sonata, and later I will ask you some questions about it. Unfortunately, we will have to also stop that. That's a beautiful sonata. I was not aware of it. It's beautiful, very interesting. What can you tell me more about the sonata or Cécile Chaminade, which is now also, there are so many conferences and competitions about women composers. So what can you tell us about it?
Well, so Chaminade, I used to be a flutist in a past life, and Chaminade's best known piece today probably is this concertino for flute that she wrote. It's a wonderful piece, and I played it when I was 12 years old or something on the flute. And that was my first exposure to Chaminade. What was interesting then was I mentioned, I was working with Earl Wild already, I guess, and I mentioned that I was playing this Chaminade piece, and he mentioned, oh yeah, she wrote this scarf dance, and she was known as a miniaturist, basically. Mm-hmm. She lived a very long life. I want to say she was born in the 1860s and lived to the 1940s. Yeah. And she was very successful in her lifetime, actually, but in her earlier output, you get these big pieces like this C minor sonata, and there's also two marvelous piano trios. I've had students play both those trios in the last year, and I want to do them. I think they're so terrific. And she also wrote a concert piece for piano and orchestra, which I'm interested in. But these are all early works, and she was basically actively discouraged from pursuing that direction in her music, and she became famous as a writer of piano miniatures and little songs. And that was seen as more appropriate for a woman. And there was a lot of criticism that her music, and you can hear that in the beginning of the sonata, that her music was too masculine and that she shouldn't be doing these large forms because they weren't really suitable for women. It's such a horrible attitude, right? We look at it, it's hard to imagine.
I think there's a quote that says that she's not a woman composer, but a composer that is a woman.
Well, but that's a great tribute. And that came from, I believe, was that Ambroise Thomas? I'm trying to remember.
I think so.
Yeah. And that was when she was being awarded a great honor, in fact. But nonetheless, there was I think the tendency always was to disparage her music as being of the salon and very lightweight. First of all, there's nothing wrong with salon music. Yeah. And second of all, she wrote these other pieces as well. So she was really quite versatile. This sonata is remarkable. I actually, if you think about it, this is a good piano literature question. How many piano sonatas by French composers from the late 19th century can you name?
Yeah.
There aren't any.
No.
Right? So here's this piece written in the early 1890s.
Yeah.
And it's a wonderful sonata, and it's quite original structurally. I think, out of some frustration, perhaps, the last movement she ended up including as one of her etudes. So she recycled it in a different opus. The second movement is a real jewel. It's a beautiful, beautiful movement. I love the first movement because she really says, starts out in a sort of Frankian way, as if she's going to write a prelude and fugue.
Yeah.
Because the second theme is presented initially as a fugue. And then the whole structure is highly original. It works totally, but it does not conform to anything that we would call a sonata form.
I heard the two voice fugue there, and then all of a sudden becomes very, very chordal.
Right. Yeah, but it's beautifully controlled, and she has a real mastery of structure. But what's interesting about it to me is the fact that unlike some of her contemporaries who were meddling with sonata forms, she doesn't really care, in a sense. She's going to do it her own way, and she does it very, very well. And her piano writing is wonderful. She was a virtuoso player herself, and she knows how to use the instrument. She understands sonority beautifully. So there's much to recommend this. I'm very up on her music overall. I think there's lots to explore, and particularly in this earlier period.
Oh, wonderful. It's amazing how time flies when we are having fun.
Yes, indeed.
But I would like for you to talk about it. Do you have any projects that are coming up? And if there's something that we can look forward in hearing you play. I know you've been in Brazil and you have been in Taiwan, Taipei. And what can you tell us about the next project?
Well, first of all, I have to acknowledge that COVID has had a real impact. And, as I think is true for many of us, the amount of concert activity has been depressed and depressing. I feel like I'm just starting to crawl back. I was lucky enough to play the Schumann quintet with the Takach quintet a few weeks ago, and it just feels like every concert is kind of a piece of luck that you get to play. I've got 3 concerts next week, but it's been a long dry spell. And it's, I'm not quite sure what the future holds in a sense. There's a few things, but there's not a lot of
Where are they going to be, the 3 concerts coming up?
So I'm playing in Boulder on Tuesday as part of the Colorado Mahler Fest. It's a program called Mahler at the Piano. My colleague, Jeremy Rieger, who's a wonderful pianist and who is one of our opera conductors and opera coaches at CU, he and I are doing a number of 4-hand arrangements, 2 movements of Bruckner's Third Symphony arranged by Mahler, several Mahler symphony movements, and then I'm doing this fabulous transcription that I had not been aware of by Ignaz Friedman of the minuet from the Third Symphony of Mahler. It's wonderful. I look forward to playing this piece more. It'll be my first performance on Tuesday, but I just adore it. There's more on the program, but that's kind of the outline of it. And then the other thing I'm doing is 2 performances of the Saint-Saëns G minor concerto, which interestingly I did play in Goiânia some years ago when on my first trip to Brazil. And so I don't know when international travel for me is going to be a thing again. I am staying in touch with friends in Brazil, and I hope that I can arrange a trip down there at some point. Not sure when that will happen. I do want to come back.
Yeah.
And then I am working with my colleague Chaz Weatherby, who's a violinist here, and he has a string quartet, the Carpe Diem Quartet. We are going to put together a recording of 2 Italian piano quintets. One of them will be a world premiere recording of the quintet by Luigi Paracchio, who is a composer who I've actually been trying to get rediscovered. I did a CD of his solo piano music back in 2018, which feels like yesterday since we lost 2 years of our lives. And I've done quite a lot with his solo piano music. In the fall of 2019, when I was on sabbatical, I went to Turin, which is where he is from, and was given basically free rein to make photographs of manuscript scores of his in the library at the Conservatory in Turin. And there were a number of pieces I knew existed that I got photographs of, and I'm slowly working through the backlog. But the first part of this project is this piano quintet by Paracchio, and actually a Brazilian named Douglas Passone has been helping by doing the engraving of the score and parts for me, and that's actually just completed, and I'm looking forward to publication with Da Vinci Press of the score and parts of this Paracchio quintet, and then recording it along with the first quintet by Mario Castelnuovo Tedesco. So the timelines are all a little vague still, but that's a big project that's coming up. So,
but how did you get to know Paracchio?
So that's a funny story. There is actually there's a blog post attached to my website that you can get the full story on. But when I first came to CU Boulder, I was made aware that we had a number of scores that had the book plate, the stamp of Ricardo Viñes on them, saying from the library of Ricardo Viñes in French. And Viñes, for those of you who don't know, was a close friend of Ravel, a contemporary of Ravel. And he was the first performer of basically all of Ravel's important solo piano music, up to and including Gaspard de la Nuit. And he was also the first performer of many of Debussy's most important works, including Estampes, L'Île Joyeuse, Masque, the two books of Images, and some of the preludes and etudes as well. So a really, really important pianist in early 20th century France. Viñes was Catalan originally, and in any case, after his death, his library the family didn't quite know what to do with it, I think, but basically in the 1950s, they needed to raise some money, and they put up a large block of scores at auction, most of which were not well known. So his famous scores all ended up in places like Harvard, in a collection there. And the University of Colorado purchased something like 600 or 800 pieces of piano music from Viñes's library, almost all of which were obscure. And I went through all of these Viñes collection scores, and with my colleague Laurie Samsel, we did an article for MLA Notes. Anyway, that's a very long story to get to the fact that there was a copy of Peracchio's Nove Poemetti, 9 little poems, included in this collection. And I basically made a point of looking at the pieces that would interest me, and I had early on recorded a number of works, obscure works from the collection, French pieces, for Koch Classics. That's many, many years ago I did that recording. And I finally got around to learning the Peracchio Poemetti and recording them in 2017, 2018. And he's a wonderful, wonderful composer. That's all I can say. He was very modest. And I think like many Italian composers, whose output was between the world wars, the fact of fascism and all of the politics around music in that period meant that a lot of that music was lost. And the way the state controlled the arts and everything, and whatever anybody's individual roles were, I think Peracchio was relatively quiet. His name doesn't show up a lot, but he was meanwhile teaching a generation of composers in Turin at the conservatory, where he spent his whole life.
And people, if you want to, those who are listening to us right now, if you want to listen to the recording, it's through SoundCloud, and we cannot we are not able to put it right now in the interview, but you can go to Dr. Korevaar's website and click on the link, and you can hear the Poemetti, I think, right?
So you can find the Poemetti and the Preludi on Spotify, because that's a regular commercial CD. Yeah, so that's if you search for that on Spotify, it'll pop up.
Well, this is wonderful, and I think it's always very interesting that there's so much that we don't know that is out there, and Peracchio is one of them, and I think there are so many other composers. I just got to know now too through the underprivileged or underrepresented composers. The composer Samuel Coleridge Taylor, who is also African American composer in
Afro-British. He was.
Yeah, Afro-British. Sorry. So there are so many others that I think the role of a pianist is not only repeat what has been done, but also to promote what has not been done. And you have done a great service to the entire piano literature, and we appreciate you very much for doing that. Unfortunately, the time is flying, and I still would like for you to talk about your advice as a pianist and as a teacher to young musicians, young pianists. You can make it as broad as you want or as specific as you want. But you are, as you said, you are guiding your doctoral students to a life after the degree, which you said that you didn't have that at Juilliard. But give us your advice to those young musicians and pianists.
Yeah, well, I think first of all, there's so many things that we can do as pianists. And I think, and this was something that I always followed myself, that it's very important that we work with others in various ways. So as pianists, we are privileged to be able to collaborate with other musicians so easily because of all the repertoire that's out there, and all the duos, all the trios, all the quartets, all the quintets. So the more chamber music and collaborative work that you can do, the better it is, in a sense. To me, I have to say, it's interesting because we were looking at solo piano repertoire today, but I spend so much of my time doing chamber music as well, and it's such a rewarding part of my life. And I know that I would be I just wouldn't be the pianist I am if I hadn't done all of that. So that's my number one thing. And I think the other thing, as a life skill issue, and I don't see enough young pianists who really have this now, learn how to sight read. Learn how to sight read. So many people just struggle learning a piece for such a long time. And I have a what do I want to say? I was always a good reader. I was lucky. I was a better reader than I was a practicer, and it took me a long time to figure out how to actually play well. But the reading part means that you can develop a large repertoire, So we're talking about these pieces by unusual composers today, but when COVID started up, my first project was to make videos on an out-of-tune piano of all 32 Beethoven sonatas, because that was the Beethoven year, as you will recall.
Yeah.
And so I'm not suggesting you just play unusual pieces. I think we need to be well-rounded in terms of our repertoire. If you are able to sight read, that gives you a way of learning music. It's not about listening to a recording of somebody else doing it. And when you're working with obscure music, that's really important, right? Because there may be no recordings or only one recording, and you have no way of actually evaluating whether you like that recording or not if you can't read the score. So having a way of getting to the music. So that's a really big one. I think the other thing to do is to improvise. Sit down at the piano and make stuff up. Get comfortable with it. A variety of styles. Can you improvise in a kind of, loosely 18th century style? Can you improvise something kind of romantic? Can you improvise something kind of impressionistic? Can you improvise something atonal that you believe in? There's a wide world of sounds out there, and we are able as pianists to make them by ourselves as well. And improvisation is, I think, a bit of a lost art for us in the classical piano world, and one which I would encourage everybody to at least try. Do it in private. You don't have to do it for other people, but do it. What other advice? You're going to have to make your own career and life. If you want to be in music, it's really up to you in the end. Sure, you want to build a network, you want to know people, you want to have people who can help you, but you're the one who's going to have to make the calls, send the emails, make the demo recording if that's what you want to do, get ready for the job interview, whatever it is. And the other thing is that you can do all kinds of different things. And I look at, actually, I'm always heartened by how creative and entrepreneurial my students are these days compared to how I was. I feel like this generation has a much better handle on the fact. And then we have all these resources. Now there's a kind of democratization because you can put your own stuff up on YouTube. Just make sure it's good. And, learn how to place your microphones and whatnot so that you get a decent sound. I'm not very good at that, by the way. I'm giving advice that I should take myself. But there's all kinds of skills you can bring to bear in terms of getting yourself out there. So that's a whole ton of stuff.
Yeah, I think also COVID has brought us together a little bit more. There's always good and bad, and I always say that this program, for example, came up after COVID, and also the use of technology has been a big thing in the music world. And it's not just for specialists; it's for anybody right now. I also would like to talk to you about combining this career as a teacher and as a pianist. How can you handle all of this and not forget about not Dr. David Korevaar, but David Korevaar as a person?
Yeah, life-work balance, right? That's what they call that these days. It's tough. And I think, right now, what I see among my colleagues is that we're all pretty burned out because of what we've been dealing with for the last couple of years, and the students too. It's been a rough ride for a lot of us. But I think in general, you also have to have a life. You have to have relationships with people. You have to, you have to get outdoors. You have to get out of your practice room. You have to get out into the sunshine. You should live in a place where they have sunshine. That's a piece of advice. I live in a place with sunshine. I like it. And take good care of yourself. Have things you enjoy that are not playing the piano. I do a lot of hiking and a lot of running and things like that. I just love to be outdoors. And I'm lucky enough to live in a place where it's easy to be outdoors. But I think that's really important for our mental health, and also you can't be a well-rounded musician without being a well-rounded human being. I think that's very important. I think Rubinstein makes this comment about what you should don't practice more than 3 hours a day and enjoy your life.
Yeah, you cannot bring sore if you cannot experience pain, and you cannot bring love if you haven't experienced that. And I really appreciate what?
And awe. We need awe.
We need all. I really appreciate you accepting this invitation, and I will encourage everybody that has been looking around and looking for concerts, and if there's any available in your region, go watch the musicians. We are eager to go back to normal life, but also to check Dr. Korevaar's website. It's an amazing amount of work that he has done and he has recorded. And coming from a Latin American country like me, I know that improvisation and sight reading is something that is lacking in some curriculum, and especially in the ones based on the European style, the conservatory style. Those are two wonderful advices that you had given us today, and I appreciate very much. Is there any final word that you would like to give us? And again, there are people from all over the world, as well as in the United States as well. So if you want to give any last minute advice, we are here and we are all ears for you. So.
Well, I appreciate your asking me for wisdom. I'm not sure how wise I am, but I will say thank you very much for the invitation. It's been a pleasure to speak with you, and I hope that this something useful and something enjoyable has come out of this interview for those people who are watching. It's really it's an honor to be able to speak to people and share music with them.
Well, thank you very, very much. Stay with us. We are going to go backstage while Andrea is going to finalize the program, but we would like to speak to you afterwards. So stay with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Korevaar. Thank you so much for sharing with us your life, your music, your brilliant art. And I hope to see you playing live.
Yes, well, I hope to come back to Goiânia.
Thank you very much, Dr. Korevaar. Thank you very much, Dr. Cruz. Thank you. Muito obrigada pela presença. Esse é um programa da Escola de Música e Artes Cênicas com a Reitoria Digital da Universidade Federal de Goiás, Mississippi State Universrity e Universidade do Atlântico, com apoio da Fundação para Ciência e Tecnologia de Portugal, Centro de Estudos de Sociologia e Estética Musical da Universidade Nova de Lisboa, Centro de Estudos Brasileiros e Rádio Universitária FM. Obrigada a todos do Brasil que estão conosco e de todo mundo. The Piano and its Perspectives is a program of the School of Music and Performing Arts, Digital Department of the Federal University of Goiás, Universidade do Atlântico, Colombia, and Mississippi State University, United States, with support from the Foundation for Science and Technology of Portugal, Center for the Studies in Sociology and Musical Aesthetics of the University of Lisbon, Center for Brazilian Studies, Radio Universitária, and Radio Brasil Central FM. Besides me, Pablo Lisboa, Rosângela Seba, Yamira Rodrigues Nunes, and Wesley de Menezes are part of the program's team. Our proposal is to bring to all those interested issues related to the importance of music and its role in society. Thanks so much to all of you for the audience. See you next week. Thank you very much.